When I want to understand the cause or the impact of a war in history, it can be very tempting for me to read a basic synopsis of the conflict and believe that I understand the general idea. But oftentimes these summaries are limited, or at worst, misleading. This is especially true of the Franco-Prussian War, which was produced by years of contention and complex diplomatic intrigue. So to understand it, we first need to illustrate the geopolitical situation in Europe at the time. It's 1852 in France, and in an attempt to reanimate the French Empire, President Napoleon III names himself the new Emperor of France. This act blatantly signals the French re-entry into active power projection. Fast forward a year later in 1853, and France's new emperor is already provoking Russia in the Crimean War. And even though France would claim victory, the war still proved rather inconclusive, but it did help bring France back onto the international stage. Regardless of this, Napoleon III was still eager for a more prestigious and powerful France. Switch over to Prussia in 1866 under King Wilhelm I as he finishes the 7 Weeks' War against Austria. This war concluded with the formation of the North German Confederation, and the end of Austria's influence in the German region. With half of Germany now unified under Prussia's banner, and southern Germany without Austria's protection, Prussia sees a clear opportunity to expand her borders south. But there's one looming threat standing in her way. As can be inferred, the prospect of a unified German state to oppose France was not taken well by the French people and government. We can see the growing tension by the late 1860s between the two competitors. Both sides knew that war was inevitable. France needed to stop Prussia from expanding, and Prussia sought to unite Germany. But neither side wanted to start the war against each other out of fear of intervention by powers such as Britain and Russia. So for now, both sides would remain quiet. As tensions did increase, one event would prompt the two nations to take action against one another. In June of 1870, revolutionaries in Spain ousted their queen, Isabella II. The country was then without a legitimate ruler, and a letter was sent by the Spanish military junta to the Prussian Prince Leopold, offering him the crown. King Wilhelm was hesitant to endorse Leopold, but Otto von Bismarck recognized the potential to gain an ally on the Iberian Peninsula. Bismarck eventually convinced Leopold in secret to accept the invitation onto the Spanish throne, but Napoleon learned of it soon enough. He was in full protest and demanded that Wilhelm object to Leopold's coronation. Wilhelm did so in order to prevent a premature war, but Napoleon III pushed it further. He sent a diplomat, Count Vincent Benedetti, to speak with Wilhelm I. The French diplomat demanded that the Spanish throne should not be meddled with by the Germans in complete perpetuity, but Wilhelm refused. What would then be dubbed the Ems Dispatch was sent to Bismarck from Wilhelm, outlining the meeting between the French diplomat and himself. Otto von Bismarck found himself in the perfect position to justify a war with France without the possibility of international repercussions. Bismarck published the Ems Dispatch in the press, but manipulated it to make both the diplomat and the king come off as insulting towards one another. This inflamed public opinion in France so much so that on the 15th of July, the French parliament approved of mobilization in preparation for war against Prussia. In reaction, the Prussian and Bavarian armies mobilized a day later. By the 19th of July, France officially declared war and hostilities commenced. As Bismarck foresaw, no other nations decided to intervene in the war. General mobilization in France would end at around 900,000 men as the war progressed, and the Germans would mobilize 900,000 on top of their already 500,000 strong army. By late July, Napoleon III officially assumed command of the French forces at Metz, numbering around 200,000 men. In early August, Napoleon III took the offensive, but would soon withdraw before the Germans could arrive after realizing the scale of their mobilization, which was faster and more efficient than that of the French. Furthermore, the German army was logistically superior to the French army, mainly through Prussia's more competent usage of railroads. This allowed the Germans to deploy far quicker. By mid-August, a series of battles would take place all over France, and the Germans would be constantly on the offensive. The most pivotal battle took place a month later at Sedan on the 1st of September, where 200,000 soldiers confronted 130,000 French soldiers who were attempting to relieve the siege of Metz. With the adept leadership of Field Marshal Helmut von Moltke, the Prussians encircled the French and quickly broke their lines, ultimately resulting in the surrender of Napoleon III and his entire army, marking the end of the Second French Empire and the beginning of the Third French Republic. With the capture of the main French army, the Germans proceeded to Paris just a day later, subjecting it to a nightmarish 130-day siege, which the new Republican government tried to break several times without any success. With Paris starving, the French government initiated peace talks on the 24th of January, 5 days after King Wilhelm was proclaimed Emperor of Germany, out of which they obtained a ceasefire agreement. After intense negotiations in the Treaty of Frankfurt, the Germans successfully proposed a treaty in which they were given the German-speaking region of Alsace-Lorraine and made France recognize the German Empire. On top of this, France was obliged to pay 5 billion francs to cover the costs of German occupation. As Napoleon III had abdicated, the Papal States were absorbed into the Kingdom of Italy, meaning both Germany and Italy were officially unified. The integration of Alsace-Lorraine by the Germans from the French would lead to even more friction between the two powers, which contributed to the causes of World War I, in which the French would reacquire the region. In this war, the Germans suffered approximately 45,000 dead and 90,000 wounded. The French suffered around 140,000 dead and 140,000 wounded, and almost 500,000 captured. At a glance, the Franco-Prussian War was started by France over a letter. This is the most apparent reason for the conflict. However, it is just as important to look at everything behind the scenes from multiple perspectives. By understanding all of the background information, one could make the case that Prussia was the true aggressor. This is a clear example in history of fabrication and public manipulation to justify an entire war. To that point, it's fairly obvious that the war wasn't just about insults and national pride, but rather about the long-term geopolitical entanglements of the German and French interests. For this reason, a thorough study of any historical event is imperative to see past the ostensible. If you want to know how the North German Confederation and their allies won the war so quickly, be sure to check out our follow-up video on the battles of the Franco-Prussian War. Thank you for watching. I'd like to thank my patrons on Patreon: Emerson, Emmanuel, Ademski, Derek, Alex, James, Jacob, and Joe, and those working on the Armchair History team, researcher and writer Alexander Blake, graphic artist Gert Boss, and my animator for making this video possible. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.